May 3, 1943. The silence of the pre-dawn sky over the Soviet-German front line is broken by the solitary hum of an engine. Red Army radar stations detect an unidentified aerial object rapidly approaching from the west. The alarm raises the anti-aircraft gun crews. Short commands echo in the headphones of communications operators. "Target at 2,000 meters, course, eastbound." But instead of the expected raid, something unusual happens. The German plane descends, extends its landing gear, and lands in the neutral zone. A man in the uniform of a high-ranking Wehrmacht officer exits the cockpit. He raises his hands, showing he is unarmed. Soviet border guards surround the unexpected guest. In their eyes, a mixture of distrust and astonishment. Before them stands a colonel of the German General Staff who has voluntarily defected to the enemy's side, an act unthinkable by wartime standards. "I have not come to you as an enemy," he says in broken Russian. His words open one of the most surprising and little-known pages of the Great Patriotic War. Walter Mueller was born in 1897 into the family of a Prussian officer, for whom military service was not just a profession, but a family tradition rooted in the Napoleonic Wars. In the Mueller household, the concepts of honor and duty to the fatherland stood above personal interests. Little Walter fell asleep to his father's stories of great battles and heroic deeds of German soldiers. When the First World War broke out, 17-year-old Walter, without hesitation, entered a military academy. His youthful enthusiasm quickly collided with the harsh reality of trench warfare. The Western Front, where he arrived in 1916, became a true school of life for him. In one of the battles near Verdun, young Lieutenant Mueller displayed extraordinary bravery, leading his platoon out of encirclement. His chest was adorned with the Iron Cross Second Class. However, it was there, amidst the mud and blood, that the first doubts about the expediency of this slaughter arose in his mind. He later wrote in his diary, "Germany's defeat and the humiliating Treaty of Versailles deeply wounded the young officer's pride." Like many of his compatriots, Mueller felt the bitterness of injustice. During the years of the Weimar Republic, he continued his military career in the Reichswehr, where he stood out for his analytical mind and strategic thinking. Mueller, like most of the officer corps, met the Nazis' rise to power in 1933 with cautious optimism. The revival of Germany's military might, the repeal of the humiliating restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, the restoration of national pride, all of this appealed to the career officer. However, behind the grand facade of the Third Reich, Mueller increasingly noticed alarming symptoms: intolerance of dissent, the cult of the Führer's personality, the persecution of Jews caused internal protest in him. He was particularly concerned about the growing influence of party functionaries on military affairs. The army is becoming an instrument of politics, not a defender of the fatherland. This entry in his diary is dated 1937. Despite his doubts, Mueller's career developed successfully. By the beginning of the war with the Soviet Union, he was already a colonel of the General Staff, participating in the planning of Operation Barbarossa. However, it was the Eastern Campaign that became a turning point in his worldview. Cruelty towards the civilian population, mass executions, the scorched earth policy. All of this contradicted his ideas of war as a clash of armies, not peoples. He was particularly shocked by the actions of the Einsatzgruppen in the front-line zone. Gradually, a decision matured in Mueller's mind, which many would call betrayal, and he himself, an act of conscience. Using his position in the staff, he began to collect information about the plans of the German command, hoping that it would help stop the war machine that had spun out of control of reason and humanity. The night of April 29th to 30th, 1943, was moonless. Thick clouds obscured the stars, creating ideal conditions for the operation Walter Mueller had been planning for several months. Every detail was meticulously thought out, every step carefully measured. One mistake would mean certain death. Mueller arrived at a small field airfield near Smolensk an hour before the appointed time. The official pretext, an inspection of aviation units, raised no suspicions. A colonel of the General Staff had the right to visit military facilities within his area of responsibility. "Everything is ready, Herr Oberst?" quietly asked young Lieutenant Kurt Wagner, the only person privy to the plan. A former anti-fascist student who had miraculously escaped Gestapo arrest, Wagner served as Mueller's personal adjutant and shared his views. "Yes, Kurt, there's no turning back," Mueller replied, checking the contents of the briefcase containing secret documents. The plan was audaciously insane: to hijack a light reconnaissance aircraft, a Focke-Wulf FW-189, fly it over the front line, and land on Soviet territory. Mueller had chosen this twin-engine aircraft not by chance. The machine possessed excellent maneuverability and sufficient flight range. Wagner, who had basic piloting skills, was to fly the plane. Mueller, in turn, carried priceless cargo: maps of German troop dispositions, plans for future operations, ciphers, and radio communication codes. At 23:30, they approached the aircraft. The sentry saluted, suspecting nothing unusual. "Night reconnaissance flight by personal order of the Army Group Command," Mueller briefly explained, showing forged documents. The engines started on the first attempt. Wagner confidently taxied to the runway. A few minutes later, the Focke-Wulf was already gaining altitude, heading east towards the positions of the Soviet troops. "Altitude 500 meters. Flying at treetop level to avoid radar detection," Wagner said tensely, peering into the night darkness. Mueller remained silent, gripping a pistol. He understood that they could be shot down by either side. To the Germans, they were traitors. To the Russians, they were still enemies. 40 minutes into the flight, they saw flashes of artillery fire, the front line. Wagner lowered the altitude to the limit, practically touching the treetops. The maneuver was risky but necessary to avoid detection. Suddenly, the night sky was illuminated by searchlight beams. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. "They've spotted us!" Wagner shouted, maneuvering sharply. The plane shook from near shell bursts. A shrapnel piece pierced the fuselage, wounding Wagner in the shoulder, but he continued to control the machine. "Hold on, we've almost crossed," the lieutenant uttered through clenched teeth. Once they were over Soviet territory, Mueller took out a white sheet, prepared in advance for such an occasion. He unfurled it and secured it to the fuselage, an improvised flag of surrender. Wagner began to descend, searching for a landing spot. Below lay a field, flat enough to attempt a landing. "This is our only chance," he decided, guiding the plane down. The landing was hard. The landing gear broke. The plane skidded along the ground for several tens of meters and stopped, nose down in the soft soil. Mueller helped the wounded Wagner out of the cockpit. They moved away from the plane and raised their hands, awaiting the appearance of Soviet soldiers. The dawn of May 3rd found them already at the Soviet unit's location. A new stage of their lives began, no less dangerous and unpredictable than the night flight across the front line. Colonel Walter Mueller and the wounded Lieutenant Wagner were immediately separated. The first hours on Soviet soil became a true ordeal for them. Mueller, still in German uniform with colonel's insignia, was taken under heavy guard to the front headquarters. The first interrogation began immediately. In a small room of a village house, converted into a headquarters, Mueller was awaited by 3 men. an NKVD representative in the uniform of a state security major, a military intelligence officer, and an interpreter. Who are you, and for what purpose did you cross the front line? The first question sounded dry and official. Mueller, maintaining outward composure, began to speak. He introduced himself, stated his position, and explained the motives for his action. He spoke clearly, in a military, concise manner, without emotion, as if reporting the situation at the front. I have brought you information that can save thousands of lives and hasten the end of the war, he said, pointing to his briefcase with documents. The NKVD major looked at him with unconcealed suspicion. Why should we believe you, Herr Colonel? Perhaps this is clever disinformation, and you are a German spy. Mueller had expected such a reaction. Check the documents I brought. They will confirm my sincerity. The briefcase with papers was immediately confiscated for examination, and Mueller was sent to a separate room under the guard of 2 submachine gunners. Long hours of waiting began. The second interrogation took place late at night. This time he was treated differently, with wary interest. The documents brought by the colonel turned out to be authentic and extremely valuable. Tell us more about the planned operation in the Kursk area, the intelligence officer asked, spreading a map before Mueller. The colonel, without hesitation, began to explain the strategic plan of the German command, indicating the directions of the main attacks, the composition of the participating units, and the timing of the offensive. Operation Citadel is to begin in early July, he said, marking the positions of the SS Panzer divisions on the map. The interrogations continued for several days. Each time, new people came, asking the same questions in different formulations, trying to catch contradictions. Mueller was tested on his knowledge of the smallest details of the German military organization, command structure, and personal characteristics of senior Wehrmacht officers. Who commands the 3rd Panzer Army? What is the relationship between Manstein and Model? What are the Führer's personal habits? Questions poured in one after another. Mueller answered clearly, without hesitation, understanding that every word he spoke was being recorded and checked against other sources. On the 5th day, he was transferred to Moscow. Now the interrogations took place in the Lubyanka building. The level of the interrogators noticeably increased. High-ranking officers of Soviet intelligence and counterintelligence sat before him. "Do you understand that for Germany, you are a traitor?" one of them asked directly. Mueller met the heavy gaze. "I betrayed not Germany, but Hitler and Nazism. These are different things." Gradually, the nature of the interrogations changed. From checking loyalty, they moved to detailed extraction of information. Mueller was asked to compile analytical notes, draw diagrams of German fortifications, and assess the strengths and weaknesses of Wehrmacht commanders. 2 weeks into intensive interrogations, something unexpected happened. Mueller was moved from his prison cell to a comfortable room in a special facility near Moscow. He was given a desk, books, and allowed walks under guard. Comrade Stalin personally reviewed your testimony, his new curator, State Security Colonel Ilyin, informed him. Your information has been recognized as exceptionally valuable. Now we are to work together. Thus began a new stage in the life of Walter Mueller, a former Wehrmacht colonel who became an advisor to the Soviet military command. Distrust still remained, but the first, most difficult barrier had been overcome. The information provided by Colonel Mueller proved truly invaluable to the Soviet command. It was not just intelligence gold, it was an entire safe full of treasures, opening up previously unseen opportunities for the Stavka of the Supreme High Command. For the first time during the war, Soviet strategists received a complete and reliable picture of the enemy's plans firsthand. Of particular value was the information about Operation Citadel, a large-scale offensive that the German command was planning in the Kursk salient area. Mueller provided not only the general concept of the operation, but also precise data on the composition of the strike groups, the directions of the main thrusts, and the timing of the offensive. He described in detail the new types of tanks the Germans intended to use, quote, 0 and quote, 1, their technical characteristics and tactical application methods. Mueller said at one of the meetings at the General Staff of the Red Army, "Thanks to this information, the Soviet command decided to move to a deliberate defense on the Kursk arc. Unprecedented preparations began. Deeply echeloned defensive lines, minefields, and anti-tank areas were created." Marshal Zhukov personally supervised these preparations. Zhukov said after reviewing the documents provided by Mueller, "One of Mueller's key contributions was the disclosure of the German Army's code and cipher system. Thanks to this, Soviet radio intelligence gained the ability to intercept and decipher German command orders almost in real time. This provided invaluable tactical advantages during combat operations. No less important was the information about the psychological state of the German troops and the mood in the Wehrmacht's high command." Mueller spoke in detail about the growing disagreements between Hitler and the generals, about the doubts about the possibility of victory that began to spread even among convinced Nazis. "After Stalingrad, many generals understand that the war is lost," he said. "But no one dares to openly oppose the Führer. Fear paralyzes the will." These psychological nuances helped the Soviet command better understand the logic of the enemy's actions, anticipate his decisions, and plan their own operations more effectively. In early July of the 43rd year, the Battle of Kursk began. Events unfolded exactly as Mueller had predicted. German tank wedges plunged into the Soviet defense precisely in the places and at the time he indicated. But the Red Army was ready. Prepared defensive positions, pre-planned counterattacks, and precise knowledge of the enemy's intentions allowed them to withstand the initial onslaught and launch a decisive counteroffensive. After the victory on the Kursk arc, Marshal Vasilevsky invited Mueller to a closed meeting. "Your information saved thousands of lives of our soldiers," he said, shaking the former Wehrmacht colonel's hand. "History will yet appreciate the significance of your act." In the following months, Mueller continued to work actively with the Soviet command. His analytical notes on the weaknesses of the German defense, the peculiarities of the tactics of individual units, and the personal qualities of the commanders were used in planning offensive operations of the Red Army. Walter Mueller's transformation from a loyal Wehrmacht officer to a convinced anti-fascist was not a sudden revelation. It was a prolonged evolution of views that occurred in the mind of a man raised in the traditions of the Prussian military aristocracy, yet possessing a critical intellect and a strong moral compass. Mueller's first doubts about the correctness of the Nazi course appeared as early as 1937, when he witnessed the purges in the Wehrmacht's high command. Professional military personnel who did not share the party's ideological tenets were ruthlessly eliminated. "The army is becoming an appendage of the party machine," he wrote in his diary at the time. However, the decisive factor that overturned Mueller's worldview was the atrocities in the occupied Soviet territories. As a staff officer, he had access to reports on the actions of the Einsatzgruppen, special SS units engaged in the mass extermination of the civilian population. Mueller admitted during one of his interrogations in Moscow, after defecting to the Soviet side, Mueller went through a complex period of ideological re-evaluation. Soviet political workers held regular talks with him and gave him works by Marx, Lenin, and Stalin to read. Initially, he perceived this as an unavoidable part of his new situation. He later recounted, "Gradually, Mueller began to make public statements addressed to German soldiers. His first radio address, recorded in August 1943, was restrained and rational. He spoke of the senselessness of continuing the war, of Germany's inevitable defeat, and urged Wehrmacht officers to consider their historical responsibility. Every day of the war brings our homeland closer to catastrophe," he said. "The duty of a true patriot is to save Germany from the complete destruction that the Hitler regime is bringing upon it." Soviet specialists carefully analyzed the sincerity of Mueller's ideological transformation. State Security Colonel Ilyin, who supervised the work with the German Defector, noted in his reports, "An important stage in Mueller's ideological evolution was his acquaintance with other German anti-fascists in the USSR. Meetings with members of the National Committee Free Germany, an organization uniting German prisoners of war and political émigrés, helped him realize that he was not alone in his choice. I saw people who loved Germany no less than I did, but understood its future differently than the Nazis," Mueller wrote in his memoirs. "This gave me confidence in the correctness of my path." By the end of 1944, Mueller's transformation had reached a new stage. Now he not only rejected Nazism, but actively embraced many aspects of Soviet ideology. His speeches began to include discussions about the class nature of fascism and the role of monopolistic capital in unleashing the war. How sincere was this embrace of Soviet ideology? Historians still debate this. Some believe that Mueller simply adapted to circumstances, saying what was expected of him. Others point to the consistency of his views even after the war, when external pressure was no longer present. Mueller himself said in his later interviews, "I did not become an orthodox communist, but many ideas of social justice that I saw embodied in the Soviet Union deeply influenced me. The war forced me to reevaluate everything I had believed before." By the winter of 1943, Walter Mueller had fully established himself in his new role. He now worked in a special unit of the General Staff of the Red Army, located in a classified mansion on the outskirts of Moscow. His official status was vaguely worded, military consultant. But in fact, he became a key advisor on German military strategy and tactics. Mueller's daily work began early in the morning. At 6 o'clock, an adjutant would bring him fresh intelligence reports from the fronts, intercepted German radio messages, and operational maps. By 8 o'clock, Mueller had to prepare an analytical memo evaluating the current situation and forecasting enemy actions. General Shaposhnikov noted in an official memorandum, Mueller's consultations proved particularly valuable in the preparation of major offensive operations. When the liberation of Belarus was being planned, he held a series of meetings with front commanders, meticulously dissecting the specifics of Wehrmacht defensive tactics, the psychology of German generals, and vulnerabilities in the command and control system. German defense is built on the principle of echelonment, he explained to the Soviet generals, but there are always poorly protected junctions between adjacent army groups. That is where the main blow should be delivered. Initially, many Soviet officers regarded the German defector with unconcealed suspicion. In their eyes, he remained an enemy who had betrayed his country and therefore did not deserve trust. Once, after a meeting at Stavka, Lieutenant General Antonov approached me, Mueller later recalled. Looking straight into my eyes, he asked, "And what will prevent you from betraying us too, if the situation changes?" I replied that I had betrayed not my homeland, but a criminal regime, and those are different things. Gradually, the ice of distrust melted. The accuracy of Mueller's predictions, his deep knowledge of the enemy, and his obvious sincerity in his desire to hasten the end of the war changed attitudes towards him, especially after his recommendations helped significantly reduce losses during a number of operations. An important part of Mueller's work was participating in the interrogations of high-ranking German prisoners of war. Here his role was twofold. On the one hand, he helped Soviet officers formulate the right questions, and on the other, he psychologically influenced the prisoners, demonstrating that even senior Wehrmacht officers were choosing to cooperate with the Russians. When Mueller entered the interrogation room in a Soviet uniform without insignia, the captured German generals were literally speechless, said Colonel Novikov of the Military Intelligence Directorate. After that, they became much more talkative. A special area of Mueller's activity was working on plans for Germany's post-war arrangement. Together with a group of German anti-fascists, he developed projects for the demilitarization and denazification of the country, compiled lists of war criminals, and analyzed possible forms of resistance from the Nazi underground. Germany must be cleansed of Nazism to its foundations, he said at one meeting, but we must not allow the German people to be punished for the crimes of their leaders. That will only generate a new wave of revanchism. Despite his high status and value to the Soviet command, Mueller never forgot his dual position. Every step he took, every word he spoke, was closely monitored by state security officers. His apartment was under constant surveillance. All contacts were recorded and correspondence was checked. I understood that complete trust would never be given, he wrote in his memoirs. I made my choice and had to live with its consequences. By mid-1944, Walter Mueller had become one of the key figures in Soviet propaganda efforts directed against Germany. His unique position, a former high-ranking Wehrmacht officer who voluntarily defected to the enemy side, made him an ideal weapon in the information war. Mueller regularly spoke on Radio Free Germany, which broadcast to territories occupied by German troops. His deep, confident voice with a distinctive Prussian accent was well recognized among German soldiers and officers. Soldiers and officers of the German army, I address you not as an enemy, but as a compatriot who understands the full tragedy of your situation. A typical address by Mueller would begin, like you, I swore allegiance to Germany, but an oath to a criminal regime leading the country to catastrophe cannot be sacred. True patriotism today means saving the German people from ultimate destruction. The effectiveness of such appeals was high. According to Soviet intelligence, after Mueller's speeches, the number of German soldiers surrendering increased. Many of them admitted during interrogations that it was the arguments of the former colonel that made them reflect on the futility of further resistance, said one captured lieutenant. In addition to radio addresses, Mueller participated in the creation of leaflets dropped over German troop positions. He personally edited the texts, striving for maximum persuasiveness. A distinctive feature of his approach was the use of military terminology and an appeal to the professionalism of German officers, recalled Colonel Burtsev, who headed the propaganda department. The German command's reaction to Mueller's activities was extremely painful. Goebbels personally ordered the launch of a counter-propaganda campaign. In German newspapers and radio broadcasts, Mueller was called a, quote, 6, a, quote, 7, a, quote, 8. His family in Germany was subjected to repression. His wife was arrested by the Gestapo, and their property confiscated. In April 1944, German intelligence attempted to physically eliminate Mueller. A group of saboteurs was sent behind Soviet lines with the specific task of finding and liquidating the defector. The operation failed. The saboteurs were intercepted by Smersh counterintelligence, But the very fact of such an attempt indicated how seriously Berlin perceived the threat posed by the former colonel. One of Goebbels' assistants stated at a meeting in the Reich Ministry of Propaganda, "He destroys the morale of our troops from within." One of the most effective propaganda projects involving Mueller was the Union of German Officers, an organization that united captured Wehrmacht officers who opposed Hitler. Mueller became the ideological inspirer of this union, developing its program and manifesto. "We, officers of the German army, unite to save the honor and future of our homeland," the manifesto stated. "Our duty is to stop the madness of war and create conditions for the revival of a free, democratic Germany." By the end of the war, the influence of Mueller's propaganda activities reached its peak. Thousands of German soldiers and officers surrendered, often carrying passes signed with his name. These small slips of paper with the text, "The bearer of this has voluntarily surrendered and must be brought to the headquarters of the nearest Soviet unit," saved many lives on both the German and Soviet sides. After the war, Mueller continued to work in Soviet agencies involved in the denazification of Germany. His experience and knowledge proved invaluable in identifying hidden Nazi criminals and creating new democratic structures in East Germany. "I do not regret my choice," he said in one of his last interviews. "In that war there could be no neutral position. Everyone had to decide whose side they were on, humanity or barbarism." May 1945. The victorious salvos of Soviet cannons announced the end of the most terrible war in human history. For millions of people, the long-awaited time of peace had arrived. But for Walter Mueller, a former Wehrmacht colonel who had become an advisor to the Soviet command, the cessation of hostilities brought new, unexpected challenges. Now he had to find his place in a world where front lines had been replaced by invisible, yet no less insurmountable boundaries of ideologies and political systems. The first post-war months Mueller spent in relative comfort. His services to the Soviet Union were recognized at the highest level. He was provided with a spacious apartment in the center of Moscow, a personal driver, and even a small staff. Formally, he continued to work as a military consultant, participating in the preparation of materials for the Nuremberg trials and helping to identify hidden Nazi criminals. "I thought that with the end of the war my mission was complete," he wrote in his diary in the autumn of 1945. "But now I understand that the real battle is just beginning, the battle for the future of Germany." Mueller sincerely hoped that he would be able to return to his homeland and participate in the building of a new, democratic Germany. He sent several inquiries to Soviet authorities, but received no reply. Gradually, he began to realize that his status as a valuable specialist simultaneously made him a hostage of the system. Too many secrets were stored in his head, and his free departure to the West could become too dangerous. The news of his family's fate was a particularly heavy blow for Mueller. His wife, Ingrid, arrested by the Gestapo after his defection to the Russians, died during the bombing of a prison in Dresden. His elder son, Kurt, who served in the Wehrmacht, went missing on the Eastern Front. His younger daughter, Marta, ended up in the American occupation zone and, according to Soviet intelligence, refused any contact with her father, whom she considered a traitor. "I paid the highest price for my choice," Mueller wrote in a letter to his Soviet curator. "But even now, knowing all the consequences, I would have done the same." Mueller's position was paradoxical. In the Soviet Union, he was respected as a specialist, but never fully trusted as a person. For many Russians, he remained a German, a representative of the people who had brought untold suffering to their land. For Germans, Both in the Eastern and Western occupation zones, he was a traitor, a turncoat to the Bolsheviks. In 1947, Mueller was finally allowed to visit the Soviet occupation zone of Germany. He arrived in Berlin as a member of a Soviet delegation dealing with denazification issues. The reunion with his homeland proved painful. Ruined cities, a starving population, an atmosphere of general despondency and fear. "I do not recognize the country where I was born," he wrote after his first day in Berlin. "These are not just physical destructions. It is a spiritual catastrophe of an entire people." History is rarely black and white, especially when it comes to people who made choices that some call betrayal and others a moral feat. Walter Mueller, a Wehrmacht colonel who defected to the Soviet Union at the height of the Great Patriotic War, remains one such controversial figure, whose legacy still sparks heated debates among historians. In post-war Germany, Mueller's name was consigned to oblivion. In West Germany, he was considered a traitor. In East Germany, an inconvenient figure, a reminder of the complex moral choices of wartime. Only in the 1990s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany, did historians begin to reevaluate his role. German historian Klaus Hoffmann wrote in his monograph, "In Russia, attitudes towards Mueller have also undergone significant evolution. During the Soviet period, he was primarily used as a propaganda symbol, a German officer who recognized the criminal nature of fascism. At the same time, Mueller's real contribution to the Red Army's military successes remained classified. Modern Russian historians, having gained access to archival documents, rate his role much higher," asserts military historian Alexei Isayev. But the main question that continues to concern both historians and ordinary people is, what motivated this man? Was his defection to the USSR the result of cold calculation or sincere moral insight? Mueller himself, in his posthumously published memoirs, wrote, "Many historians note that Mueller's decision cannot be viewed outside the context of his time. In Nazi Germany, there was resistance to the regime, culminating in the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1944. Mueller chose a different path, not internal resistance, but an open break with the criminal regime. His choice was not between loyalty and betrayal, but between complicity in crimes and opposing them," emphasizes British historian Richard Evans. What significance did Mueller's actions have for the outcome of the war? Estimates range from skeptical to enthusiastic. Some researchers believe that his contribution was more symbolic, while others insist that the information he provided significantly influenced the course of key battles, especially at the Kursk salient. One thing is certain: Walter Mueller's story reminds us that even in the darkest times, a person retains the freedom of moral choice. And this choice can have consequences that extend far beyond a single human destiny.